Welcome to a new episode of A Guide to Lotro. In today's episode, Eregion. A place rich in ancient and forgotten elvish history. A place of many secrets and turning points to the Lord of the Rings storyline. One of the realms of the elves. And build a pony that needs your saving. Eregion is a valley located and found in Eriador. It stretches the land between the misty mountain chain and the river Bruinen. It also shares its borders with Evernight and the Trollshaws. Eregion once was a realm of the Noldor that survived the War of Wrath. The War of Wrath was the conclusion of conflicts in Beleriand between the elves, men, against Morgoth and his Dark Army. This war ended with the total destruction of the continent Beleriand, which was attached westwards to Middle-earth. Ultimately, Beleriand sank into the ocean Beligere and was gone forever. The few remaining elves fled to Middle-earth, where they eventually rebuilt in different communities. Eregion was one of them, founded by the Noldors such as Galadriel and Celeborn. They ruled Eregion for a good 500 years during the Second Age. The dwarven kingdom Khazad-dûm, which was built inside the Misty Mountains, also shared a border with Eregion. Those two realms were known to have a very good relationship in trade and military. This also led to the construction of Durin's Gate, which would allow the elves of Eregion to have a passage into Khazad-dûm. To open a gate, one has to say the elvish word for friend. But not only elves and humans were forced into a rebuilding phase after the War of Wrath. The enemy that was thought to be defeated did the same. In secret, Sauron, the most loyal and powerful servant of Morgoth, was also rebuilding his power. He built his evil kingdom Mordor and engaged further into the breeding of orc races. But he also chose a more hidden approach to weaken his foe. By taking on his neutral Maiar form, calling himself Anatar, the bringer of gifts, he presented himself to the elves of Eregion as a herald of the Valar, bringing them goods, help and counsel. Galadriel and Celeborn, which were the current leader of Eregion, did not believe Anatar. They decided to leave Eregion to establish a new kingdom which shall not be tainted by anyone. This kingdom later on was then called Caras Galadon or Lothlorien. Celebrimbor was said to be the leader of Eregion onwards, taking Anatar into his council. Celebrimbor was one of the last Eren of Feanor, leader of the Noldor. As all Noldor, especially descendants of Feanor, they were known for their unmatched skill in crafting. Celebrimbor himself was a master in jewelry. Time flight and Anatar's influence got stronger. He convinced Celebrimbor to craft rings for all the remaining rulers in Middle-earth. But not just ordinary rings he was crafting there. Those were rings infused with magic and power. 9 were crafted for the men and 7 for the dwarves. Anatar took his chance to craft a ring in secret by himself, which would have the power to corrupt the ones Celebrimbor crafted under his guidance. Celebrimbor also desired to craft rings of power for his kin. Without Anatar's knowledge, he crafted also 3 rings of power for the elves in secret. Those rings were called Nenya, Vilya, and Narya. Since they were crafted without Anatar's knowledge, they could resist the power of the one ring and were immune to its corruption. Those 3 rings were then given at first to the mighty elven leaders such as Gil-galad, Galadriel, and Círdan. But later on, after the death of Gil-galad and Círdan eventually, those rings would then go to Elrond and Gandalf. In the end, Anatar would reveal his true form as Sauron to the elves of Eregion. The rings of men and dwarves were already distributed, turning them into slaves of his evil will. This is, for example, how the Nazguls were created. Whatever happened to the 7th Dwarven ring, nobody really knows. So basically Sauron would also find out about the 3 Elven rings that were crafted in secret and without his knowledge. A major conflict erupted between Sauron and Celebrimbor. Sauron revealed his dark kingdom, Mordor, sending armies of orcs and other creatures to Eregion to capture Celebrimbor and destroy the elves living there. His main goal was to find out where the 3 elven rings of power were located, to take them for himself. Celebrimbor was then ultimately captured and tortured. Unfortunately he was killed, but he would never say a word about where the elven rings of power are. Eregion was then destroyed in that war. There was even an attempt by the elven king of Lindon, Gil-galad, to free Eregion from the siege. For that he sent an army led by Elrond the Half-Elf. Well, they were unfortunately too late and then ultimately also defeated. Elrond and another few elves survived and basically fled into the Trollshaws, where they eventually entrenched themselves into the Valley of Bruinen. The stronghold they founded there was then after called Rivendell. But anyway, Sauron would also extend his invasion to Lindon, was then ultimately stopped and forced to retreat by an army of Númenóreans. After all this war, Eregion would not be restored, leaving it behind as what we find it today in the game, for example. So let's come to the landscape section about Eregion. First, we are going to look at the Redhorn Pass. This is the pass that the Fellowship tried to take in order to get across the Misty Mountains. In the game you can actually walk this pass yourself, of course. The Redhorn Pass is a very steep mountain slope, which the higher you get, of course, it gets more snowy and icy. Eventually you will reach the end of the Redhorn Pass. You will also then realize that there's a snow obstacle that you cannot cross. At the end of the Redhorn Pass there's also a very steep snowy wall that unfortunately you cannot climb. But actually on top there is a portal that brings you to Rovanion, or the Wales of Anduin map. There's a smaller half or a camp called Tar's Dask, or however you pronounce that, to be honest. Moving down a bit more south, there's the Walls of Moria. So this is basically the entrance to Moria. You will also find here the pond in front of the gates of Moria with the Watcher inside, but you will only encounter the Watcher's arms really in the story. And of course you're going to find the gates to Moria, which you're going to open in the storyline basically. The next place I want to show is Non Sir Nanon, which is the entrance to the Walls of Moria. There's a smaller outpost with elves and dwarves, which is called Ekat Dunan. Other than that, the Non Sir Nanon is a steppe full of wargs, wolves and bandits as well as half-orcs. Non Sir Nanon also means Vale of the Sir Nanon in Elvish. But the river is like dried out, so all that remains is basically the valley of that. There's also a smaller outpost with Dunlandians. This one is called Port Cadlos. Next I'm going to show you the Emin Nair. This place is the most southern part of Eregion. It is basically the border to Enedvite and Dunland. And of course you're gonna find a bunch of Dunlandians here, which are obviously not friendly. There's a bigger fortress of them called Munut Cadlus. Another place, and probably one of the more interesting one, is Mirobel. So this is a bigger elven city / ruin. During my research and while reading the books I couldn't really find Mirobel showing up in there. So it might be a place that was added to kind of give also a settlement for the elves there. So Eregion had one bigger place, which was kind of the capital. This place was called Ost in Edil. It could be that the rights for the Lord of the Rings Online were limited when it comes to like mentioning places that show up in the Silmarillion or other books which are not the Lord of the Rings. But I think there's a lot of hints that Mirobel is basically Ost in Edil. One hint is that there's a place called Tam Mirdain. In the books there is the Gvaid I Mirdain mentioned, which is basically the Guild of Jewelers. So they already shared the second part of their name basically. Next let's have a look at Ekat Eregion and the surroundings. Ekat Eregion is a smaller outpost similar to Ekat Dunan. The region around Ekat Eregion is called the Hollands, and there's a high and a lower part and basically a very wide open landscape. You will find here a lot of like wild animals like lynxes and wolves. But apart from those, there's a very nice view on the Redhorn and the Silvertin, which are one of the 3 mountains that make up the Misty Mountains at Moria. Here we would also find a bunch of enemy encampments. This one is called Bannock and it's a Dunlandian outpost. There's an older elven ruin which is called Barad Morals and it's full of half-orcs basically. There's a bunch of quests you will have to do here. And finally there's also Pembar, which is another elven ruin also inhabited by half-orcs and worms. So the Pent Eregion is found in the northeastern part of the zone. Well, the only really thing to say about this place is that it's it's one of the Trollshaw connections, which leads from the Giants Valley. Other than that, there's a little mountain chain called the Holland Ridge. So last place in the landscape section is Glad Eric. So basically this is usually the place where people land when they come into the zone. It's a little forest which is full of like forest trolls and horns, as well as some bandits as well. Gwingris is another elven ruin it's like an outpost that you can visit. Also the first place you're gonna enter Eregion and get quests basically. There's a little glade with a cave called Sad Tarek, which is full of like forest trolls. So the first Slayer Deed half-orcs, well, the best place personally I think is Barat Morals to do, which is this little elven ruin found next to Ekkad Eregion. For the Dunlending Slayer, Munut Kadlos is a good option. This is a bigger camp found to the borders of Enedvite in Emin Ner. But honestly, like the Dunlanding Slayer is kinda did automatically when you just quest in Eregion. For crawlers and lizards, Ulundin is a good option, which is the region found around the river in Emin Ner. For that, just roam around those like rocks and trees and you will find a lot of lizards that you can slay for the Slayer Deed. For wolves and wargs, the Nan Seranon is a good place to roam around. So I think the last Slayer Deed is the Krabans. Well, your best option is probably Pent Eregion. You basically just run around and they're all over the place. That's really like a specific spot. There's another interesting deed which is called the Uruk Captains of Eregion. For this deed you have to defeat 7 Uruk Captains, which are shown here on the map. The problem is most of them you cannot just go there and kill them, unfortunately. Most of them are tied to quests that basically let you summon them. So in order to get this deed, you have to basically quest all over the place in Eregion. Another deed is the Ringlord of Eregion. For this deed you have to find 6 pages. 2 pages are dropped and 4 you have to collect from rubble that you can find. You can see that here in the map. For the pages that you receive by drops, you have to go to the places I marked in pink. The place in Glad Erek you have to defeat Dunlandians, and the one in Holland Ridge, this is in Pembar, you have to defeat half-orcs until it drops. For the ones that you can find in rubble, you have to go to the places marked in red, and it's pretty easy to find them, like you just click the rubble and then you loot it. There's also a hidden deed, basically like an Easter egg, that I'm going to show in the special section. Well, so the special section is now, basically. There's a deed which is a very short, like, jumping puzzle, I guess, and it's kind of an Easter egg. This is called the Holland Ridge Race. You find this up there where I mark it on the map. In order to get the deed, you have to reach that little tower up there that I show you in the video. So for this, you start at the northeastern part of the Holland Ridge, which is this little mountain chain. I suggest that you do this on a horse, because you need to reach a certain travel speed to do certain jumps. There's quite a few slippery parts, but the goal is basically to jump from the patches which have some sort of grass or vegetation. Well, in the video you can basically see the path. I mean, you kind of have to try it out a bit until you get it. And to be fair, the server lags don't really help with this deed. But it is what it is. So when you reach the tower, you basically get this deed that I show you here in the video. It's not a major reward, but it's a nice little Easter egg, I would say. So the next special place is Minas Elendur. So this is a huge, like, indoor, underground, elven fortress that you can see here in the video. This is added at level 65, and basically volume 3, I think, will lead you there in the story. But I would consider it special, because it's quite an adventure to explore this place here. It also comes with a huge deed where you have to basically find, I think, 32 jumpers inside this place. I mean, it's huge. Inside you will find a multi-staged map full of like orcs and other creatures. There's also sometimes like flashbacks where you see like ghost elves versus ghost like orcs fighting. I think the goal of this place is to also bring in a little bit of the history that I told you in the history part, you know, where basically Angmar attacked Eregion in the Second Age. But who knows, it's a fun place to maybe explore for the first time. And if you do it without like the Lotro wiki, you will definitely spend like an hour or two in here. So Eregion has 2 dungeons, which are very popular actually to farm. Those are related to Tam Mirdain. Tam Mirdain is the school of the jeweler smiths, which is in line with the story of Eregion, which basically was home to the most mighty and powerful jeweler smiths that you could find. Well, basically Celebrimbor that, you know, forged the rings of power, you know. So the first of those 2 dungeons is the library of Tam Mirdain found here. I mean, obviously you don't have to walk there to start the dungeon, you can just use the dungeon finder, but back in the days you would actually have to run to the entrance of the dungeon to start it, you know. So this dungeon scales from level 50 to max. And people farm this all over the place for like traceries for the legendary weapons. The next one is the school at Tam Mirdain, which is found here, or basically the OG entrance. This dungeon also scales from level 50 to the max level, and just as the library at Tam Mirdain, it is a 3-player dungeon. Well, actually, when it comes to farming traceries, this is probably the faster option. So, since Eregion doesn't have its own reputation, we basically reached the end of the video for today. I have now almost concluded all of the Eriador maps. I think the only maps left is the Misty Mountains, and I will eventually also consider Enidvite, and, well, not sure about Ettenmoor, to be honest. So, as soon as I have finished all the Eriador maps, I will basically then make a lore video just about the entire lore of Eriador, where I basically sum up everything I told in those individual videos about each map. With that being said, thanks a lot for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like, and if you want to see more, you can also subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. Alright, thanks a lot, and I see you hopefully in the next video, which will probably be the Misty Mountains.